The sleek black leather chairs in the executive boardroom of Granville Strategies had never felt colder. Elena Marsh sat upright, her hands calmly folded on the lacquered glass table, even as her heart pounded in her chest. Across from her sat Nathan Crowley, the newly appointed managing director, flanked by a silent HR representative and a sealed manila folder. "We've decided to restructure the client engagement department," Nathan began, his voice syrupy but sterile. "Effective immediately, today will be your last day." The words landed with clinical finality. Elena's gaze didn't flinch. After 25 years building Granville into a client-first consultancy admired across Seattle's financial sector, she wasn't about to give Nathan the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She spoke slowly, her voice even. "Does Leon know about this?" she asked, referring to the firm's founder, Leon Granville. Nathan's jaw shifted slightly. "All partners were informed," he replied, avoiding her eyes. Elena didn't press him. She already knew the answer. The HR woman, who had introduced herself as Clarissa but had yet to speak, slid the folder across the table. "Inside you'll find your severance package. 2 months' salary and full benefits through the end of the quarter. There's also information about your non-disparagement agreement." Elena's eyes rested on the folder, but she didn't open it. "This isn't a reflection of your performance," Clarissa added, almost as an afterthought. Of course it was. At 58, Elena had become the oldest executive in client services. Her compensation, built over decades of loyalty and performance, likely looked too weighty on Nathan's latest efficiency charts. Outside the boardroom window, downtown Seattle glittered with late-morning sunlight. It was the kind of view people worked their whole lives to earn. Elena had earned it. She'd arrived at Granville in 1999, when the firm barely filled 1 floor of an old converted cannery by the pier. Back then, Leon Granville had hired her personally, saying, "Numbers matter, Elena, but people keep the numbers flowing." That philosophy had shaped everything she did. While others chased internal promotions through grandstanding and politics, Elena focused on what mattered: relationships. She remembered which clients had children applying to college, which ones needed quarterly reports broken into visuals instead of spreadsheets, which ones called just to talk through strategy late into the night. She made Granville irreplaceable by making herself irreplaceable. Now she was being walked out of the building like an expired password. Back at her desk, a security guard, no older than her youngest client's assistant, stood awkwardly nearby as she packed her things. Crystal awards. Handwritten thank you notes. A framed photo of Elena with Diana Kim, CEO of Pacifica Health, taken at a charity gala the year Granville helped them avoid a merger disaster. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Diana. "Heard something unsettling about Granville. Please call me before end of day." She felt her fingers tighten around the phone. Nathan, from behind the glass wall of his corner office, was already on the phone, no doubt managing optics. They thought she was replaceable. That client trust could be reassigned with an email signature. She stepped into the elevator with a box of memories and nothing else. The lobby receptionist stood up, eyes wide with disbelief. Elena offered a tight smile. "Just a little unexpected shift in priorities," she said. Then the elevator doors closed. Her apartment was eerily quiet. She sat at her kitchen counter, her laptop open to a job board filled with roles she could have taught classes on. Her LinkedIn profile had gained over 600 views in less than an hour. The industry noticed. Whether out of curiosity or calculation, she couldn't tell. She'd spent her life making others feel valued. Now she was a trending name for the wrong reasons. Her landline rang. She almost didn't answer it. Then she saw the caller ID, Leon Granville. "Elena," he said, his British accent clipped. "I just landed from Frankfurt and what happened? This wasn't authorized by me." Elena closed her eyes. "They waited until you were out of the country, Leon. It was passed as an emergency approval. I asked Nathan directly. He gave me the usual lines." Silence hung on the other end. She imagined Leon pacing, confused, embarrassed, and possibly threatened. "Let me fix this," he finally said. "We can call it a communication error. I'll speak to the board. Get you reinstated." Elena didn't respond right away. She thought of Nathan's words. Legacy fat. She thought of the way her name had vanished from meeting invites in the past 6 months. The junior associates taking her place on accounts she had cultivated for decades. "It's not that simple anymore," she finally said. Leon didn't argue. Instead, he asked the question that made her breath catch. "How are the clients taking it?" That afternoon, her inbox filled up. Diana Kim, Omar Patel from Astoria Biopharma, Rachel Greenwell from Summit Capital. Each message different in tone but identical in concern. Something had shifted. They weren't just asking what had happened. They were asking what she was going to do next. That night, Elena received a courier envelope. No company name. Inside was a note from Maya Liu, the most influential executive recruiter in the Northwest. And a folder. 3 offers. One of them from Blackridge Advisory, a firm Elena had always admired from afar for staying grounded while still growing. She hadn't returned a single call yet. But by morning, her phone would not stop ringing. At exactly 7:42 a.m., Elena answered her phone on the second ring. She didn't need to check the caller ID. Diana Kim's clipped, determined voice filled the room before Elena could even offer a greeting. "Tell me you're not gone," Diana said. "Tell me this is some sort of misunderstanding." Elena stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching a barge drift across Elliott Bay. "I'm gone," she replied quietly. "They're calling it a strategic restructure." Diana let out a disbelieving exhale. "They assigned my account to someone named Ava Shelton. Do you know her?" Elena nodded slowly. "Junior partner. Strong analyst. Not exactly built for nuance." Diana's tone dropped into fury. "Last time she briefed me, she tried to explain the fundamentals of my own budget strategy. I almost walked then." Elena hesitated, her words measured. "Granville is shifting its approach. They're betting on models, not relationships." Diana fell silent for a beat. "I don't care what they're betting on. Our contract is up in 90 days. If you haven't joined another firm by then, I'm not renewing." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. And by lunchtime, 5 more clients had said almost the same thing. Elena didn't ask them to follow. She didn't whisper rumors or leverage frustration. But the phone kept ringing. Rachel Greenwell called to say she had cancelled her quarterly review. Omar Patel requested a breakfast meeting, off the record. Even Westridge Manufacturing, loyal to Granville for over a decade, sent a formal request for transition options. It was all unraveling. And all Elena had done was stay silent. That evening, she met Maya Liu at an understated French restaurant nestled between Pioneer Square's galleries. Maya wore confidence like a custom-fitted suit. She placed her phone face down and leaned in. "I've watched this industry for 20 years, Elena. What's happening now? This isn't just about one woman getting pushed out. It's about what happens when clients realize the person they trusted has been replaced by a spreadsheet." She opened her leather folder and slid it across the table. 3 firms want you. Blackridge Advisory is the strongest offer. Equity partnership. Freedom to build your own client strategy team. You'd be the face of their West Coast expansion. Elena's fingers rested on the compensation sheet. The numbers weren't just competitive. They were double what Granville had ever offered. "They're not just buying your skills," Maya added, reading Elena's reaction. "They're buying your voice in the market. Your name on the client trust chain. They're buying peace of mind." Elena closed the folder slowly. She wasn't used to being courted. She wasn't used to power looking like choice. That night, she sat at her kitchen table and opened her email. Subject: Meeting request. Urgent. From Leon. She stared at the message. A part of her still respected him. The man who once told her, "We rise by how we treat people when the numbers look good, and even more so when they don't." But Leon hadn't protected her. Not when it mattered. The next morning, they met at a discreet cafe near the waterfront. Leon looked like he hadn't slept. "I've lost control of the board," he confessed before their drinks even arrived. "Nathan has leveraged his alliance with the newer partners. He's trying to force me into early retirement." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And you think bringing me back will fix that?" Leon didn't deny it. "They see you as a signal. A signal that we haven't abandoned our roots." Elena sipped her coffee. "Your clients are abandoning you. Not just because I'm gone, but because they see the writing on the wall." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a printed offer. "Chief Client Officer. Direct report to me. Full control of the Client Experience Division. Compensation package well above what you had. I'm trying to correct my mistake." Elena scanned the document briefly, then placed it face down on the table. "You're trying to save yourself, Leon. I respect that. But I'm not a correction. I'm a consequence." Back home, the doorbell rang. Another courier. Another letter. This one from a law firm representing Horizon Capital, the primary investor in Granville. Inside was a formal inquiry. Had Elena engaged in client solicitation? She smiled bitterly. She hadn't made a single call. The clients were doing the talking now. Later that evening, her phone rang again. "Maya." "Elena," she said, her voice tinged with mischief. "Blackridge just made an addendum to the offer. You won't just be a partner. You'll be named head of transition strategy if we move forward with an acquisition." Elena's breath caught. "Of Granville?" she asked. There was a pause. "Let's just say Horizon Capital is open to discussions, especially now that client revenue projections have cratered." Elena looked out at the darkening city, lights flickering across towers that had once felt like fortresses. The account they forgot to count was her. The morning air carried a tense stillness as Elena stepped into the glass atrium of Blackridge Advisory. It was her first formal visit since the offer was extended, and while no papers had been signed, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. As she rode the elevator up to the top floor, she felt a shift, not just in altitude, but in gravity. People stood when she entered the boardroom. Maya Lu met her with a nod and a quiet, knowing smile. "You're not here just as a candidate anymore," she whispered. "You're the pivot point." Across the table sat 3 senior partners, each with portfolios larger than anything Elena had managed in her career. And yet, each one asked her questions not about forecasts or pipeline charts, but about trust. About people. About how she managed to retain 96% of her accounts over a 20-year span in an industry infamous for churn. "It's never just about service," Elena said simply. "It's about remembering that companies don't sign contracts, people do." By the time she left, the final terms were being drafted. That same afternoon, Elliot Crane, her former assistant, texted, "They're panicking." Then another. Leon's calling an emergency all staff for Monday. Clients are demanding answers. You might want to check the Boston Ledger. Elena opened the article on her phone. Headline, 7 major clients cut ties with Granville in 48 hours. The byline belonged to Cameron Rhodes, a respected industry reporter who rarely printed anything speculative. The story included anonymous quotes from clients citing concerns about loss of trust and the departure of key personnel. Elena's name was mentioned once, in passing, and without commentary, but her influence was all over the paragraphs. That evening, her landline rang again. It was Leon. His voice, usually calm and theatrical, now trembled with urgency. "Did you orchestrate this?" he asked. "The board is in chaos. Horizon Capital is threatening to pull funding unless we stabilize retention numbers. They're saying you've engineered a mutiny." Elena spoke evenly. "I haven't spoken a word against Granville. Not to the press. Not to clients. Not even to your competitors. All I've done is answer the phone. Leon exhaled harshly. Then how do you explain this? He forwarded an email to her inbox. Elena opened it slowly. Attached was a scanned letter on the letterhead of Diana Kim, co-signed by 25 other clients. It was addressed to Horizon Capital, the Granville board, and Leon himself. The request was direct and unmistakable. Remove Nathan Crowley. Reinstate client-focused leadership. Or we walk. Elena blinked at the signature block. Nearly 60% of Granville's billables were represented. She didn't reply. There was nothing to say. That night, her phone buzzed again. Maya. Blackridge just received word, she said. Horizon is accelerating acquisition talks. They want a transition lead named in the next 72 hours. They want that name to be you. Elena stared out at the city skyline. What about Nathan? Already being isolated. Horizon doesn't want drama, they want solutions. The next morning, Maya handed her a sealed folder. Inside was the finalized partnership offer, equity, full strategic control of integration, and a transition clause. One that read, upon acquisition of Granville Strategies, Elena Marsh will assume leadership of client portfolio transition and retention. The ink hadn't even dried when her phone rang again. This time it was Diana Kim. They've scheduled a final review call with Ava Shelton, Diana said, her tone cold. But I told them not to bother. Elena raised an eyebrow. That's bold. Diana's voice softened. You spent 12 years learning my company better than I knew it myself. Ava sent me a pitch deck. You sent me handwritten notes during my father's surgery. That's not replaceable, Elena. I'll wait until you're somewhere that actually deserves you. By nightfall, 8 more clients had echoed the sentiment. At Blackridge, the executive floor stayed lit past midnight. Acquisition papers were being polished. Financial due diligence finalized. Behind the scenes, lawyers prepared the press embargo. The deal would be announced before the end of the week. Elena sat alone in a quiet side room, flipping through her personal notebook, the same one she'd carried through hundreds of client meetings. On a faded page from 2 years ago, she saw a quote she'd scribbled during a client conference. People don't leave companies. They leave when they're no longer seen. It was never revenge. It was recognition. And now, the firm that hadn't seen her value was about to belong to the woman they let walk away. The early morning fog had barely lifted from the bay when Elena arrived outside Granville Strategies. She stood across the street for a long moment, watching through the tall glass windows as staff moved briskly inside, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the lobby. Her heels tapped against the stone floor as she crossed with calm certainty. The receptionist, new, young, and clearly unprepared, froze mid-sentence when Elena walked in. Miss Marsh, she stammered. Are you here for the all-hands meeting? I am, Elena replied, her voice quiet but firm. Leon is expecting me. A call was made. Heads turned. Whispers followed her through the corridor as she stepped into the very building that had dismissed her just 3 weeks earlier. Now she walked its halls not as a ghost, but as a reckoning. The conference room on the 32nd floor buzzed with anxious energy. Nearly every seat was filled. Partners flown in from both coasts, junior staff pressed along the walls, the board seated in an anxious row. Nathan Crowley was nowhere to be seen. Leon Granville stood at the head of the room. He looked thinner, older, more aware of his shrinking influence. His voice trembled slightly as he called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming, he began. We're facing unprecedented client volatility. Decisions made over the past quarter have unsettled our client base. But I believe we can still correct course. All eyes turned when Elena stepped into view. I'm pleased to announce that Elena Marsh has agreed to return to Granville, Leon continued, attempting a hopeful smile. She will be leading a newly formed client relations division as a full equity partner. A ripple moved through the room, surprise, relief, uncertainty. But Elena didn't take her seat. Instead, she stepped to the front beside Leon and turned to face the room. She spoke clearly, every word slicing through the silence. "I appreciate the invitation," she said. "But I must clarify something before we go any further." Leon's smile faltered. "I'm not returning to Granville Strategies," she said. The room froze. A beat passed. "I have accepted a partnership with Blackridge Advisory," she continued. "And as of this morning, Blackridge has finalized acquisition terms with Horizon Capital to assume controlling interest in Granville Strategies." Chaos erupted. Voices overlapped. Gasps punctuated the roar of confusion. One of the board members stood up as if to speak, but sat down again before saying a word. Leon staggered back half a step. "The transition will begin next week," Elena said, holding steady. "I will be overseeing client portfolio integration across both firms. Our intent is to retain staff and avoid unnecessary disruption, but strategic alignment will be assessed on a case-by-case basis." Leon stepped forward. "Elena, what have you done?" She turned to him without anger. "I didn't do anything, Leon. Granville did this to itself. When it valued margin over meaning. When it pushed people out and assumed clients would stay for the brand." Someone near the back dropped a coffee cup. No one moved to pick it up. "Nathan Crowley has been removed from his position, effective immediately," she added, "by Horizon's directive." Leon looked devastated. The realization hung in the air. He had not only lost control of his firm, but had failed to protect the very person who had built its most important asset. Elena's eyes swept the room, settling on familiar faces. Some avoided her gaze. Others nodded quietly, almost in apology. A few looked genuinely relieved. She didn't wait for questions. Her message was complete. As she turned and walked toward the elevator, her phone buzzed with a message from Diana Kim. "Dinner tonight. We need to talk next steps. You just changed the game." Elena stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind her. She had returned, but not for permission. She had returned to lead. 3 days after the meeting, the sign on Granville Strategies' downtown tower still hadn't changed, but everything inside had. Blackridge's transition team moved quickly, not with arrogance but with precision. Conference rooms once dominated by hollow pep talks now echoed with realignment meetings. Spreadsheets were replaced by people maps, lists of who held trust, not just titles. And at the heart of it all was Elena Marsh. She didn't take Leon's office. She didn't need it. Instead, she converted a corner meeting suite on the 34th floor into a shared strategy hub. Anyone could walk in. Many did. Some with proposals. Others with apologies. Most simply wanted to know where they stood in the new order. One by one, they came. Ava Shelton, shaky and unsure, admitted she had been handed Diana Kim's account without so much as a transition briefing. Elena didn't scold her. She handed her a list of Diana's past concerns and quietly said, "Study this. If you want to keep that account, you need to learn her business better than she does." Even Elliot Crane, her former assistant, dropped in. "They're all trying to rewrite history," he said one afternoon. "Suddenly everyone remembers how they always admired you. Always questioned Nathan. It's like watching a parade of amnesia." Elena smiled but didn't reply. She didn't need to. The numbers were speaking louder. Client retention, once plummeting, now hovered above 95%. 3 of the 7 companies that had left during the chaos had already re-signed under new terms. New inquiries came in daily from firms who, just months ago, wouldn't have taken Blackridge's calls. The acquisition wasn't just a rescue, it was a rebirth. But not everyone was settling quietly. Leon Granville had requested a formal meeting. Elena agreed, though not in the old boardroom. She chose a neutral office with glass walls and no prestige attached to it. Leon arrived with tired eyes and a slow gait. He looked like a founder out of time. "You orchestrated this," he said without accusation, only resignation. No, Elena replied calmly. I accepted a future that made sense. One you refused to see coming. You could have stayed. Fought for it from the inside. I did, she said, voice still. For 25 years. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, with quiet bitterness, now you control everything. I don't control anything, Leon. But I influence what matters. She slid a thin folder across the table. Blackridge is offering you a 3-year advisory role. Non-executive. Title only. You'll remain a public figure, but with no operational authority. He didn't touch the folder. And if I decline? Then you walk with your equity payout. But the firm will move on. The clients already have. Leon stared at her, the weight of 2 decades pressed into his shoulders. I built this company. You did, Elena nodded. And then you abandoned what made it strong. I was part of that foundation. You let Nathan chip away at it. He opened the folder with trembling fingers, scanned the pages, then closed it again. I'll sign it. As he left, she felt no triumph. Only clarity. By the end of the week, the signage outside the building changed. The new name, Blackridge Granville Consulting, a nod to history, without the illusion that it was still in control. Inside her new office, Elena reviewed a stack of onboarding proposals from newly interested firms. Some were rivals. Others were firms she'd quietly admired for years. Each came with personal notes. We want your leadership style. We trust your instincts. We followed your story. Her story. For the first time, the name on the folder matched the force behind it. Not just a consultant. Not just a trusted advisor. Now, finally, the architect of the very structure others had once tried to demolish. The building felt different now, less like a battleground, more like an organism healing itself. But even as new energy rippled through the hallways of Blackridge Granville Consulting, not all wounds had closed. Elena moved with quiet authority, but she had learned long ago that power brought shadows. Especially when it had been reclaimed rather than handed over. Her days blurred with strategy sessions and integration briefings. Each hour brought new complexities, conflicting client systems, incompatible billing structures, fragile egos adjusting to new chains of command. Elena handled them all with her signature calm, but beneath the surface, something stirred, a pattern. Certain legacy clients were stalling, citing vague doubts. Some former Granville partners had begun whispering again, this time behind closed doors about Elena's aggressive transition style. She knew what was happening. Those who had stood idle during the chaos now feared losing what remained of their status. And instead of owning their inaction, they pointed fingers at the woman who had dared to return not seeking validation, but ownership. It came to a head on a Thursday afternoon. Elena was pulled into a closed-door meeting with a subcommittee of Horizon Capital stakeholders. At the head of the table sat a man named Julian Kerr, the private equity firm's liaison. Polished, reserved, but unmistakably sharp. Elena, he began, there's concern among some of our senior partners about the pace of cultural transition. Words like unilateral and non-collaborative have been mentioned. He let the words hang in the air like smoke. Elena didn't flinch. You're hearing from people who are happy to stay silent while Granville hemorrhaged trust. Now that we're rebuilding, they're uncomfortable with accountability. Julian steepled his fingers. I'm not here to dispute your results. They're undeniable. Retention is up. Revenue projections have recovered. But perception matters. And perception is that you're rewriting the story faster than they're ready to accept. Elena folded her hands on the table. I was erased. Quietly. Without dignity. And the firm almost collapsed because it forgot what loyalty meant. I don't intend to erase anyone. But I won't apologize for setting a new standard. The room went still. Then Julian leaned forward slightly. You understand the politics. That's good. Just stay aware. Not every enemy raises their voice. Later that evening, Elena found herself walking the pier behind her apartment, wrapped in a long coat as the wind picked up from the sound. Her phone buzzed. A message from Maya Liu. Asterisk, need to prep you for the BBJ feature. Full profile spread going live next week. They want to frame you as the face of the turnaround. Asterisk. Elena stared at the screen for a long moment. She thought about the silence, how it had protected her reputation while chaos swirled. How she'd chosen not to retaliate, not to speak publicly when she could have. And yet, that silence had now become a blank canvas that others were trying to repaint. Back at her apartment, she opened a folder labeled Legacy Reports. Inside were memos, archived notes, client transitions she'd quietly documented when Nathan began sidelining her. She had never shared them. Never needed to. But perhaps it was time. Not for revenge. For clarity. That night, she drafted a personal letter to the entire firm. No bullet points. No jargon. Just truth. She titled it, Asterisk, Why I Stayed Quiet. Asterisk. She didn't press send. Not yet. But she saved it. Letting its presence exist. Like her. A quiet force waiting to be understood. Because sometimes the most powerful story isn't the one they publish. It's the one you're finally ready to tell. Monday arrived with a crispness in the air that felt almost theatrical. The kind of day that begged for clarity, or confrontation. Elena stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, Seattle's skyline folding into morning mist. Her inbox had been quiet overnight, but silence in her world was never absence. It was potential. Pressure. Waiting to tip. The BBJ feature dropped at 9:03 a.m. The headline was unapologetic. Asterisk, the woman who took back the clients. Asterisk, a full-page portrait of Elena accompanied the piece. Strong profile, backlit by cityscape. Inside, the article traced the fall and rise of Granville Strategies through Elena's ousting, the client revolt, and the Blackridge acquisition. Quotes from Diana Kim, Omar Patel, and even two former Granville partners painted a picture of Elena as decisive, principled, and, depending on the source, either a savior or a shadow. She had expected pushback. What she didn't expect was Leon's email. Asterisk, we need to talk. Not for the firm. For the story. Asterisk. They met in a quiet garden behind the university, far from the glass towers and whispers. Leon looked like he had surrendered to time. Casual sweater, no watch, no armor. Elena remained composed, but watchful. They framed it as your return, he said, eyes fixed on the koi pond in front of them. As if the firm never mattered. As if I never did. She said nothing. Leon turned to her. I don't resent you for taking control. You earned it. I resent myself for giving it away before I saw who still held its value. You chose silence when it suited you, Elena replied. When Nathan made cuts, you looked the other way. When I was pushed out, you were negotiating in Zurich. I thought the firm could self-correct, he said softly. I thought loyalty could be assumed. It has to be defended, she said. Especially when it's uncomfortable. He nodded, not as apology, but understanding. I've been asked to speak at the West Coast Leadership Summit, Elena added. They want me to talk about modern trust in consultancy. How to keep clients in a shifting market. Leon raised an eyebrow. And what will you say? I'm still writing it. They sat in silence. Back at Blackridge Granville, Maya Liu was waiting with news. Elena, she said, motioning her into the strategic suite. You need to see this. On the screen was a formal proposal from a San Francisco investment group, one of Granville's long-courted prospects who had always been politely indifferent. They want in, Maya said. They've seen the turnaround. They've seen the headlines. They're offering a $30 million portfolio migration if you personally lead the transition. Elena felt it like a pulse, confirmation, not a victory, but a vision. Make room, she said, and get the people side sorted before the numbers. That night, Elena sat in her apartment again, the city lights flickering like quiet applause. She reopened her unsent letter. Why I stayed quiet. She read it aloud to herself. Then deleted it. Because now, she didn't need it. The silence had spoken. The results had echoed. The firm had changed. And so had she. Not every story needs to be told to be heard. Sometimes, presence is the proof. By the second month of the acquisition, the dust had mostly settled, at least on the surface. The Blackridge Granville logo was now fully integrated across all client interfaces, and the firm had completed 70% of its transition audits without a single legal delay. But Elena knew well enough. Real change didn't live in paperwork or branding. It lived in the moments between. She kept her office door open more often than closed. Every morning, someone stepped in, not with complaints, but with questions. Uncertainty. Hopes. Even regret. One afternoon, Rachel Greenwell visited unexpectedly. I was in town, she said, settling into the chair across from Elena. And I wanted to see the woman who apparently saved my retirement fund from disaster. Elena smiled. It wasn't just me. Everyone says that, Rachel said, raising an eyebrow. But not everyone gets 25 clients to sign a joint letter without saying a word. They laughed. But then Rachel leaned in, voice softer. I want you to know. During the fallout, one of the Granville partners tried to reassure me. Said you'd be fine. That you always landed on your feet. I told him something I think you deserve to hear directly. Elena met her eyes. You didn't land, Rachel said. You rose. There's a difference. It was the kind of comment Elena didn't file away. It stayed with her. That evening, Maya Liu entered her office holding a portfolio stamped in gold. Incoming client from Singapore, she said. Mid-sized but global ambitions. They want to build a relationship model based on your retention metrics. Asked for you specifically. Elena raised an eyebrow. Do they know I'm not magic? They think you're the next best thing. Elena opened the portfolio and scanned the early scope. Something inside her stirred. Not pride. Not fatigue. But hunger. For the first time in years, she wasn't working to maintain a name she hadn't created. She was building something that bore her fingerprints, start to finish. By the end of the week, she'd hired 3 new client strategists. People she'd mentored years ago, now returning after leaving the industry in frustration. One had been a rising star until office politics dimmed her confidence. Another had left after being passed over in a male-dominated firm. The third was a former intern who now ran a non-profit and wanted to bring relationship ethics to the corporate world. I'm not hiring you to follow a formula, she told them. I'm hiring you to redefine what the formula is. Elena stood before a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard and wrote 5 words at the top. Trust is the infrastructure now. Below it, she began mapping client arcs, not in terms of profit, but milestones. Moments of loyalty earned. Crises navigated. Truth told early. The culture began to shift. Again. Not by order, but by example. Across town, Leon Granville attended his first advisory meeting. He said little. Mostly observed. But when asked what he thought of the firm's new direction, he paused and replied, It's finally becoming what I imagined. Just, not under me. The remark echoed. Because it wasn't bitterness. It was legacy accepted and passed on. Elena returned to her office late that night. Seattle glowed in the glass. She pulled out a drawer and opened her oldest notebook, the same one that held 25 years of quiet strategy. She tore out every page that bore the initials of the firm that let her go. Then, with a fresh pen, she wrote a new heading. M. Strategy Architecture. Asterisk asterisk. Below it, she wrote a single line. Let it be built on truth. 2 months after the transition officially completed, Elena Marsh's name began circulating in spaces it had never reached before. Not as a footnote. Not as a silent force behind accounts. But front and center, On panels, in articles, during late-night boardroom talks in cities she had yet to visit. It started with a feature in Consulting Today, calling her the architect of the most elegant leadership correction the West Coast has ever seen. Then came the keynote invitation to the Global Client Partnership Forum in Amsterdam. Maya Lu forwarded it with a single line. Asterisk, they've stopped looking past you. Asterisk. Elena declined the Amsterdam trip. Not because she didn't value the recognition, but because she had something else in motion, something closer to home. She'd quietly launched a leadership lab within Blackridge Granville. It wasn't public-facing. Not yet. She called it the table, a monthly closed-door gathering where mid-level managers, analysts, assistants, and even interns could sit with senior leadership and speak freely. No hierarchy. No hidden agendas. Just truth. At the first meeting, someone asked her how she knew which clients would follow her. Elena replied, I didn't. I just knew which ones felt seen. And people don't walk away from that easily. That line would be quoted more than once in the months to come. Meanwhile, Nathan Crowley had resurfaced. A boutique firm in Denver had brought him on as a transformation advisor. The industry snickered. Everyone remembered the collapse. His name had become synonymous with the consequences of forgetting that relationships weren't replaceable metrics. He sent no messages, made no statements, and Elena never spoke his name in public. But she felt his shadow lift, week by week, as her own grew longer. One afternoon, she received a call from the founder of a mid-size firm in Atlanta, a woman named Simone Barrett. Her voice was steady. I'm trying to avoid what happened at Granville. I have investors pressuring for restructuring, and I need someone to help me preserve what actually matters. Elena didn't give her a pitch. She offered her a seat at the next table session. That was how the movement began. Quietly. Without fanfare. Not as a consultancy brand, but as a values blueprint. By spring, other firms had begun replicating the format. Informal leadership roundtables. Transparent client touchpoints. Legacy tracking that measured not just retention but impact memory. A term Elena coined to describe the moments when a firm's action lives in a client's head far beyond the transaction. A headline from the Seattle Journal read, Asterisk, the Elena Effect, How Quiet Leadership is Reshaping Professional Services. Asterisk. She read it once, then filed it away. She didn't need it to believe the truth of it. What she needed was time. Room. People she could trust to scale something that had once been buried under silence and assumed roles. Diana Kim invited her to co-author a book. Omar Patel nominated her for the West Coast Business Honor Circle. And during a private dinner with Horizon Capital executives, the firm's CEO raised his glass and said, In 25 years, we've backed 1,000 strategies. Only one changed the culture of a company by walking out the door. Elena smiled but didn't toast. She had learned, the moment you begin believing your own myth, you stop being useful. Back in her office, she walked past the old Granville Awards that now lined a shared shelf. They no longer meant anything, not on their own. But what had risen from their collapse? That was different. Because now, her name wasn't just whispered behind closed doors or written in initials on the corner of reports. Now they were saying it, clearly, respectfully, without revision. Not because she demanded it, but because she had built something they couldn't stop seeing. 6 months after the acquisition, the offices of Blackridge Granville looked nothing like the divided empire they had inherited. The glass walls still stood, but transparency was no longer architectural, it was cultural. Elena Marsh walked those halls with steady rhythm, not as a figure of fear or hierarchy, but as a symbol of what staying true could build. She didn't lead with noise. She led with consistency. On a quiet Friday, she stood alone in the strategy room, her favorite space. Whiteboards still bore sketches of legacy accounts and trust diagrams. Next to her, a hand-drawn note from a client read, Asterisk, thank you for making our voice matter again. Asterisk, she didn't frame it. She pinned it beside the analytics. She had received offers to expand her role globally, to become the face of client ethics initiatives across Blackridge's international arms. She politely declined each one. "I'm not done here," she would say. "You don't leave the foundation while the next floor is still being built." In truth, she wasn't sure she would ever leave. This, what they were building now, was more than a firm. It was a quiet revolution stitched into everyday decisions. In how meetings began with listening, how exits were handled with dignity, how client reports included not just deliverables, but context, humanity, accountability. One morning, she met Leon again. Their dynamic had changed. Not warm, not cold. A sort of mutual peace. He had accepted his advisory role with a kind of grace that surprised her. At their final scheduled meeting, he handed her a package. Inside was a worn notebook, the first Granville ledger, dated 25 years back. "I found it cleaning out my office," he said. "You wrote more of it than I ever did." Elena flipped through its yellowed pages. Scribbled names. Early client goals. Coffee-stained corners. She saw her younger self in those lines. Ambitious, unnoticed, persistent. Not chasing recognition. Just building something that would last. She closed the book and met his eyes. "We both wrote it," she said. He nodded. But only one of us kept reading. In the weeks that followed, Elena finalized the mentorship track she'd been designing. It would launch with 10 candidates. Diverse voices. Different backgrounds. Each had one thing in common. They had been overlooked at least once in their careers. Elena saw herself in each of them. At the first session, she stood before them with no slides. No podium. Just truth. "This isn't about promotion," she said. "It's about presence. You don't need a louder voice. You need a stronger message." They listened, not because she demanded it, but because she had lived it. That evening, back in her office, she lit the last candle of a small celebration gift from a grateful client. No champagne. No grand declarations. Just a single flicker in the room she had rebuilt from memory and grit. She pulled out a new journal. The cover was blank. The pages unlined. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "Asterisk, the next chapter isn't about me. It's about what we protect when no one's watching." Asterisk. She smiled to herself. Because now, she finally understood. The most powerful legacy wasn't what she'd salvaged. It was what she'd made impossible to forget.